The great hall buzzed with sounds that no human ear could fully understand. 200 different alien species filled the massive chamber, each making their own unique noises. The bird-like Zephyrians clicked their metal beaks in perfect rhythm. The jellyfish-like Morvani pulsed with soft blue lights that somehow carried meaning. The giant stone creatures called Hestani rumbled deep sounds that made the floor shake slightly. Ambassador Chen Wei sat perfectly still at the human table. Her dark suit was pressed and neat. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple style. Her face showed nothing at all. Around her, 23 other humans sat just as quietly. They all wore the same dark blue uniforms with small Earth flags on their shoulders. At the front of the hall, a massive alien stood behind a curved desk that looked like it was made from a single piece of crystal. Council Prime Valathrix was 12 feet tall with 4 arms and skin that changed colors based on his mood. Right now, his skin showed the bright yellow patterns that meant he was pleased with himself. We will now vote on Resolution 847 Prime. His voice boomed through the hall. The translation devices built into every seat turned his words into sounds each species could understand. This resolution will officially censure the human species for their dangerous emotional decision-making in military matters. Chen did not move. She had read the resolution many times. She knew what it said. The other species thought humans were too unpredictable, too emotional, too willing to take risks that did not make sense to their computers and logic systems. One by one, the different species stood to give their votes. The Zephyrians were first. Their leader was a thin creature that looked like it was made of silver wire and crystal. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind chimes. The Zephyrian collective finds human behavior patterns to be chaotic and dangerous. It said, humans make decisions based on feelings rather than proper analysis. This leads to unnecessary risks and unpredictable outcomes. We vote yes on this resolution. The Morvani were next. Their speaker was a floating mass of blue jelly with sparks of light dancing inside it. It did not speak with sounds but sent thoughts directly to the translation system. The Morvani unity agrees with our Zephyrian friends. Human minds work in ways that cannot be predicted or controlled. Their individual thinking patterns disrupt group harmony. We also vote yes. Ope. Ope. More voices joined in. The lizard-like Korathi. The plant creatures called the Verdant Collective. The metal beings known as the Forgeborn. One after another, they all said the same thing. Humans were too emotional, too unpredictable, too dangerous to lead military operations. Even the Kelthans voted against humanity. These were the aliens that looked most like humans, with 2 arms and 2 legs and faces that could almost be human if not for their gray skin and large black eyes. The Kelthans had fought beside humans in 3 major wars. They had called humans their friends and allies, but when their turn came, the Kelthan representative stood slowly. The Kelthan Republic abstains from this vote, he said quietly. Even this was not support. It was just refusing to take a side. Chen watched all of this without moving. Inside her chest, she could feel her heart beating faster, but her face remained calm. Beside her, the other human ambassadors sat just as still. They had all known this was coming. The signs had been there for months. Only 3 species voted against the resolution. The young Drexy, who were new to the galaxy and still learning how things worked. The mysterious tomb builders, who almost never spoke at all, and surprisingly, a small group called the Wanderer clans. When all the votes were counted, the numbers appeared on screens throughout the hall. 847 votes for the resolution. Only 3 against it. The resolution passes, Council Prime Valathrix announced. His skin patterns shifted to bright gold, showing his satisfaction. Humanity is hereby stripped of all military advisory positions. They are banned from leading any joint military operations. They will have observer status only in all security matters from this point forward. The hall erupted in the alien equivalent of applause. Clicks, buzzes, light flashes, and telepathic bursts of approval filled the air. Chen finally moved. She stood up slowly, her movements careful and precise. She reached for her data tablets and placed them neatly in her diplomatic case. The other humans did the same, their movements perfectly coordinated. The sound in the hall began to fade as aliens noticed what the humans were doing. Chen sealed her case with a soft click that seemed very loud in the growing silence. She turned toward the main exit, her footsteps echoing on the polished floor. Behind her, the other 23 humans fell into line. Their steps matched hers exactly, creating a single rhythm that seemed to count down something important. Chen could feel hundreds of alien eyes watching them, but she did not look back. Ambassador Chen, Council Prime Valathrix called out when they were halfway to the exit. "Surely you wish to make a statement for the record? To address the Council's concerns about human military behavior?" Chen stopped walking. For a moment, the entire hall fell completely silent. Every alien leaned forward. Every translation device, powered up to full sensitivity, every telepathic species focused their mental energy on the human ambassador. Chen stood at the threshold of the great door that led out of the council chambers. Her hand rested on the door controls. The silence stretched on, building pressure like air before a storm. Then, without saying a single word, Chen pressed the control. The door slid open with a soft whisper of air. She stepped through it. The other humans followed her. In 10 seconds, they were all gone. The door closed behind them with a final, soft sound. In the council hall, 200 alien species sat in complete silence for the first time in 300 years. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody understood what had just happened. The humans had not argued. They had not made speeches. They had not threatened anyone or demanded anything. They had simply left. Council Prime Valethrix stared at the closed door, his skin shifting through confused patterns of green and purple. "Well," he said finally, "I suppose that concludes today's session." But as the aliens began to file out of the hall, many of them felt something they had not expected to feel. The chamber seemed smaller somehow, emptier, like something important had been lost, even though they could not quite figure out what it was. 3 months passed after the humans walked out of the council chambers. At first, most aliens thought nothing would change. The galaxy was big and complex, but it had been running smoothly for centuries. How much difference could one species really make? The first sign of trouble came from the Kepler defense grid. This was a massive network of weapons and sensors that protected the inner star systems where most council species lived. The humans had built it 50 years ago, and it had worked perfectly ever since. The grid could adapt to new threats, learn from attacks, and even predict where enemies might strike next. But now, something was wrong. Junior analyst Zephys 1147 stared at his computer screen with growing alarm. He was a Zephyrian, one of the crystal and metal beings who prided themselves on perfect logic. His job was to monitor the defense grid and make sure it was working properly. For 3 months, everything had seemed normal. But today, something bad had happened. A group of space pirates called Fleet Mordak had tested the outer edge of the defense grid. They used a new type of technology that made their ships invisible to most sensors. The defense grid should have adapted quickly and found a way to detect them anyway. That was what it always did. Instead, the grid had failed completely. The pirate ships had gotten much deeper into council space than they should have. 3 cargo ships had been attacked before military patrols could respond. Zephys 1147 ran his analysis 3 times to make sure he was not making a mistake. Each time, the answer was the same. The defense grid was only using its basic programming. It could not learn or adapt anymore. He took his report to the defense committee. The committee met in a smaller chamber that was still huge by human standards. Committee Chair Valethrix sat at the head of a long table, his forearms folded and his skin showing the orange patterns that meant he was busy and did not want to be interrupted. "The defense grid is working exactly as designed," Valethrix said without looking up from his own reports. "We have all the technical specifications. Our engineers can handle any problems." But Zephys 1147 shook his head, making a soft chiming sound. "With respect, Chairman, the specifications only cover the basic systems. The humans built adaptive learning protocols that are not documented anywhere. Without those protocols, The grid cannot respond to new threats. Velathrix waved one of his hands dismissively. Nonsense. We are not children who need humans to hold our hands. Our best minds can certainly manage a defense system. 3 weeks later, the Hestani Engineering Corps tried to update the grid's threat recognition systems. The Hestani were 12-foot-tall beings made of living stone who were known throughout the galaxy as master builders. If anyone could fix the defense grid, it should have been them. Instead, the entire system shut down. For 47 minutes, the defense grid that protected billions of lives went completely dark. No sensors. No weapons. No communications. Nothing. In those 47 minutes, 17 frontier colonies lost contact with the main communication network. Nobody knew if they were under attack, if their equipment had failed, or if something worse had happened. Rescue ships were sent to check on them, but the trips would take weeks. When the defense grid finally came back online, it was running in emergency mode only. It could detect large ships but missed smaller threats. It could identify known enemy types, but could not learn about new ones. It was like a guard dog that had suddenly gone deaf and half-blind. The problems were not limited to military systems. In the Deep Survey Division, things were getting worse every day. This was the department that made first contact with new alien species. It was dangerous work that required careful planning and quick thinking. Humans had been responsible for 67% of all first contact missions. They had an unusual ability to predict which new species might become hostile, which ones could be reasoned with, and which ones should be left alone completely. No one had ever figured out how they did it. Human ambassadors would look at data about a new species and somehow just know the right approach to take. The Zephyrians tried to replace this human intuition with computer programs. They created complex mathematical models that analyzed everything they could think of: brain structure, social organization, technological level, resource needs, evolutionary history. The computers processed all this data and produced detailed recommendations for first contact procedures. The first species they contacted using this system was called the Bren hegemony. The computer analysis said they were logical, peaceful, and interested in trade. The Zephyrian contact team approached them exactly as the program recommended. The Bren hegemony declared war on the entire council within 6 hours. It took 6 months of careful diplomacy to fix that mistake. The Bren turned out to be a proud warrior culture that saw the computer-planned approach as deeply insulting. A human ambassador probably would have spotted this immediately just by looking at their art and architecture. The computers had completely missed it. In the medical research stations, alien scientists stared at half-finished studies that they could not complete. Human researchers had been the only ones who could treat something called post-traumatic stress disorder in non-human species. This was a mental condition that affected soldiers after terrible battles. Each alien species had different brain structures and different ways of thinking. What helped a Zephyrian cope with trauma was completely different from what helped a Hestani. Human doctors had somehow figured out how to treat all of them. They had developed techniques that worked across dozens of different types of minds. Now those human doctors were gone, and the alien scientists could not figure out how their treatments worked. The research notes were there, but they were written in a way that assumed the reader understood human psychology. Without that understanding, the notes might as well have been written in a dead language. Veteran soldiers from many species were suffering, and no one knew how to help them. The financial impact was becoming obvious too. Human efficiency improvements had made council operations 40% more productive over the past 50 years. They had found ways to reduce waste, speed up communication between different species, and solve problems before they became crises. Now those systems were breaking down. Meetings that used to take hours were taking days, because no one could bridge the communication gaps between different species. Projects that should have been simple were becoming complicated because every species wanted to do things their own way. But the worst realization came when the Council tried to contact Earth to ask questions about the defense grid. They needed technical information that only humans had. Surely the humans would answer basic questions about systems that protected everyone, including human colonies. The communication attempts failed completely. Earth was not answering. Neither were any of the human colonies throughout the galaxy. At first, the Council thought this was just stubbornness. The humans were angry and needed time to cool down. They would come back eventually when they realized how much the galaxy needed them. But as days turned into weeks, a horrible possibility began to emerge. Long-range sensors could not detect any human activity anywhere. Ships sent to human colonies found empty buildings and abandoned facilities. Everything valuable had been carefully removed. Everything else had been left behind in perfect condition, as if the humans had simply decided to go somewhere else. It was impossible. There were billions of humans scattered across hundreds of worlds. You could not move that many people without someone noticing. You could not keep that kind of secret. But somehow, the humans had vanished. In the council chambers, emergency meetings were held every day. Species that had voted to censure humanity now demanded to know where the humans had gone. The same aliens who had called humans too emotional and unpredictable now desperately wanted them back. But no one knew where to look. No one knew how to contact them. And worst of all, no one was sure if the humans would come back even if they were found. For the first time in 300 years, the Galactic Council was afraid. 6 months after the humans disappeared, the galaxy faced its worst crisis in 300 years. The threat came from the Outer Rim, from a species that had never been seen before. They called themselves the Skarn Expansion, and they were unlike anything the Council had ever fought. Admiral Corvex stood in the command center of the battleship Eternal Vigilance, staring at a tactical display that made no sense. He was a Kelthan, one of the species that looked most like humans. His gray skin was covered in stress patterns, and his large black eyes were wide with shock. 12 star systems were under attack at the same time. This should have been impossible. No species had enough ships to mount that kind of assault. But somehow, the Skarn were doing exactly that. "Status report," Corvex ordered, his voice tight with tension. His aide, a young Drexy named Whisper of Wind, stepped forward. The Drexy looked like tall, thin humans with silver skin and no hair. They were one of the few species that had voted against censuring humanity. "The Skarn have taken the Proxima Defense Station," Whisper of Wind reported. "They destroyed the Centauri mining platform. They have blockaded the entire Vega system. Admiral, they are moving too fast and hitting too many targets. Our computer models cannot predict their next move." Corvex looked at the tactical display again. Red markers showed enemy positions. Blue markers showed Council forces. The red markers were everywhere, moving in patterns that seemed random but were somehow achieving perfect strategic results. "This is madness," Corvex muttered. "They are breaking every rule of proper military strategy. Their attacks make no logical sense." Whisper of Wind spoke quietly. "Perhaps that is the point, Admiral. Perhaps they learned these tactics from studying how humans fight." The words hit Corvex like a physical blow. He had fought alongside humans many times. He had watched them win battles that should have been impossible. They did things that made no sense until suddenly, they made perfect sense. They took risks that seemed stupid until they turned out to be brilliant. Other species fought with logic, with careful plans, with predictable strategies. Humans fought with chaos. They did unexpected things at unexpected times in unexpected ways. And somehow, it worked. The Skarn were doing the same thing. They were using human-style tactics against an enemy that had no humans to respond with human solutions. "Get me a priority channel to the Council," Corvex ordered. "We need help. We need the humans back. Right now." The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in its 300-year history. Species that normally spent days debating minor issues were shouting at each other in panic. The great chamber echoed with sounds of fear and desperation. Council Prime Valethrix stood at his crystal podium, his skin shifting through every stress color his species could display. His forearms gestured wildly as he tried to restore order. "We must recall the human delegation immediately," he announced. "Whatever our differences, this crisis requires their expertise." But when the Council tried to contact Earth, they discovered something that filled them with ice-cold horror. Earth was not just refusing to answer communications. Earth was not there at all. Long-range sensors showed the Sol system exactly as it should be. The sun burned normally. The planets orbited in their proper paths. But there were no signs of civilization anywhere. No cities, no space stations, no ships. It was as if humanity had never existed at all. The search expanded to human colonies throughout the galaxy. Scout ships raced to dozens of star systems where humans had lived for centuries. Every single one was empty. Not destroyed, not conquered, not abandoned in panic. Carefully evacuated. The humans had taken their people, their equipment, their knowledge, and their technology. They had left behind empty buildings and basic infrastructure. But everything that made their worlds human was gone. How is this possible? Demanded Counselor Ixtar of the Volan Symposium. The Volans were bird-like creatures with brilliant blue feathers and sharp intelligence. You cannot move billions of people without someone noticing. You cannot hide entire fleets of evacuation ships. The answer came from an unexpected source. The tomb builders, who had remained silent for centuries, finally spoke. They were ancient beings, who looked like walking skeletons made of black metal. Nobody knew how old they were or where they came from. They built massive structures in empty space and never explained why. The humans asked us for sanctuary 6 months ago, the tomb builder representative said. Its voice sounded like grinding metal. They said the council would realize their worth only after they were gone. We offered them refuge in the deep dark, beyond the galactic rim. We do not know if they accepted. The deep dark was the empty space between galaxies. No council species had ever traveled there. It was too far, too empty, too dangerous. But humans had always been willing to go places that other species found impossible. Then came the message that changed everything. It was broadcast on emergency frequencies from somewhere far outside council space. The transmission was clean and clear, but the source could not be traced. When the translation systems processed it, every alien in the galaxy heard the same calm, professional voice. It was Ambassador Chen Wei. To the Galactic Council, she said, her words carrying across light years of empty space. This is Ambassador Chen Wei, speaking for humanity. We have received your requests for assistance with the Skarn crisis. We have also received your requests for technical information about various systems we designed. There was a pause, and every alien listening held their breath. Humanity has withdrawn completely from galactic civilization. We will not return. We will not provide assistance. We will not share our technology or our knowledge. You voted to remove us from all military decisions because you found our methods too unpredictable and too emotional. We have accepted your decision completely. Another pause, longer this time. You wanted logical partners who followed predictable patterns. You have them now. Good luck with the Skarn. This is our final communication. Do not attempt to contact us again. The transmission ended. Silence filled the council chambers. Admiral Corvex received the news while his fleet was retreating from yet another Skarn victory. 3 more star systems had fallen while the council debated. The enemy was adapting faster than any computer could track, using tactics that seemed insane but worked perfectly. Sir, Whisper of Wind said quietly, perhaps we should consider surrender. Corvex looked at his aide with surprise. The Drexy were known for their courage. They did not give up easily. The Skarn are not just using human tactics, Whisper of Wind explained. They are using them better than we ever learned to counter them. Without humans to fight chaos with chaos, we have no defense against this kind of warfare. The Admiral realized the horrible truth. For 300 years, the Council had relied on humans to solve their impossible problems. Humans had been their secret weapon against any enemy who refused to fight logically. They had been the wild card that made the Council's military unbeatable. Now they were gone, and the galaxy was learning what it meant to face human-style warfare without humans to respond in kind. The Skarn were winning because they fought like humans, and the Council had sent all their humans away. In the deep dark between galaxies, Ambassador Chen Wei stood on the observation deck of a massive ship that no Council species had ever seen. Behind her, billions of humans were building something unprecedented in the empty void. Cities, worlds, an entire civilization designed by human minds, unrestrained by alien logic or alien fears. She watched the distant galaxy through the viewing port, seeing the lights of battles that would determine the fate of species who had decided they no longer needed human help. "Ma'am," a young officer asked, "should we monitor their communications? Some of them are calling for help." Chen shook her head. "No. We are not their guardians anymore. We are not their problem solvers. We are not their rescue service. They made their choice. And we have made ours." She turned away from the viewing port, walking toward the heart of humanity's new home among the stars. The galaxy would survive or fall on its own merits now. Humanity had other things to build. The search for humanity became the largest operation in galactic history. Every council species contributed ships, sensors, and personnel to scan the galaxy for any trace of where billions of humans might have gone. What they found instead was evidence of how deeply humans had been woven into the fabric of galactic civilization. Dr. Kesthera of the Volan Symposium led the investigation. She was a xenopsychologist, an expert in understanding how different alien minds worked. Her bright blue feathers had dulled to gray from stress as she compiled report after report of human involvement in galactic affairs. "The scope is unprecedented," she announced to the emergency council session. Her bird-like voice carried clearly through the translation systems. In the past century alone, humans prevented an estimated 3,847 interspecies conflicts through informal mediation. The numbers on the display screen made every alien in the chamber fall silent. Humans had been everywhere, doing everything, solving problems that most species never even knew existed. They served as cultural bridges in 89% of all new alliance formations. Dr. Kesthara continued. Their psychological research prevented at least 12 potential genocide events by identifying and treating collective trauma responses in post-war civilizations. Council Prime Valathrix stared at the data with growing horror. His skin had shifted to the deep purple patterns that meant profound shock among his people. How is this possible? How did we not know the extent of their involvement? The answer was simple and terrifying. Humans had not advertised their work. They had simply done what needed to be done, quietly and efficiently, without asking for recognition or special treatment. They had been the invisible foundation that held galactic society together. The financial data was even worse. Counselor Zeph Prime, leader of the Zephyrian Collective, presented the economic analysis with the emotionless precision his species was known for. Human-designed efficiency improvements increased council productivity by 340% over the past 50 years, he reported. Their management techniques reduced administrative costs by 60%. Their conflict resolution methods saved an estimated 47 trillion credits in prevented wars. But the economic impact was only the beginning. In the months following the human exodus, every sector of galactic society was experiencing cascading failures. The translation systems that allowed different species to communicate were breaking down. These had been maintained by a small team of human linguists who understood the subtle differences between not just languages, but ways of thinking. Without constant updates and adjustments, the translators were producing an increasing number of misunderstandings. The Korathi Confederation and the Verdant Collective nearly declared war over a translation error that made a polite greeting sound like a mortal insult. It took 3 weeks of careful diplomacy to explain the mistake and prevent bloodshed. The Interstellar Communication Network was experiencing similar problems. Human technicians had designed most of the relay stations and understood how to maintain the delicate quantum entanglement systems that made faster-than-light communication possible. Without regular maintenance, the network was becoming unreliable. Messages were being delayed, corrupted, or lost entirely. Trade agreements were falling apart because species could not communicate reliably. Medical emergencies were going unresolved because hospitals could not contact specialists on other worlds. But perhaps the most devastating loss was in the field of psychology and medicine. Human doctors had been the only ones capable of treating mental health issues across multiple alien species. They had an inexplicable ability to understand how different minds worked and what each species needed to heal from trauma. The psychiatric hospitals throughout Council space were overflowing with patients that no one knew how to help. Veterans from dozens of species were suffering from conditions that human doctors had routinely treated. Now those same conditions were considered incurable. Dr. Melanith, a Hastani psychiatrist, stood in her hospital ward, surrounded by patients. She could not help. Her stone-like features were set in permanent expressions of frustration and sadness. "I have studied human treatment methods for decades," she told her staff. "I can read their research. I can follow their procedures. But I cannot understand the intuitive leaps they made. They somehow knew which approach would work for which patient, even when the patient was from a completely different species." The search teams continued to find empty human colonies throughout the galaxy. Each one told the same story. The evacuation had been planned carefully over many months. Essential equipment and personal belongings had been taken. Everything else had been left in perfect working order, as if the humans expected someone else to use their facilities. But there were no clues about where they had gone. No navigation logs. No communication records. No witnesses who had seen massive evacuation fleets. It was as if billions of people had simply vanished into empty space. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The Wanderer clans, a nomadic species that traveled the galaxy in massive generation ships, had information that no one else possessed. Captain Drift's Between Stars was ancient even by Wanderer standards. Her ship had been traveling for over 1,000 years, and she had seen things that most species would not believe. She appeared before the Council via long-range communication, her weathered face filling the main display screen. "We saw them," she said in her raspy voice. "3 months ago, we encountered a human fleet near the galactic rim. Thousands of ships, moving in perfect formation toward the deep dark." The council chamber erupted in excited chatter from dozens of species. Finally, a lead. "They were beautiful," Captain Drift's Between Stars continued. "Ships like nothing we had ever seen. Not built for war or trade, but for something else. Something bigger." They were heading beyond the edge of the galaxy, toward the empty space between star systems. "Did you communicate with them?" Council Prime Valethrix asked urgently. The Wanderer captain's expression grew sad. "We tried. They acknowledged our presence but would not speak with us. Their leader, a woman with kind eyes and great sadness, simply waved farewell. Then they jumped into hyperspace and vanished into the void." The implication was clear. Humanity had not just left Council space. They had left the galaxy entirely. They were somewhere in the deep dark, the empty space between galaxies where no Council species had ever dared to travel. But the Council's problems were getting worse every day. The Skarn expansion had conquered 20 star systems and showed no signs of slowing down. Their chaotic tactics continued to confuse and defeat every Council fleet sent against them. More disturbing were the reports from long-range sensors. Strange energy signatures were being detected from the direction of the deep dark. Massive construction projects that bent the laws of physics. Technologies that no Council species had ever seen or imagined. The humans were building something out there in the empty void between galaxies. Something big. Something that suggested they had never intended to return to Council space. The final blow came when scout ships reached the Sol system, humanity's birth world. Earth was still there, orbiting the same sun it had circled for billions of years. But it was completely empty of human life. The cities remained, but they were dark and silent. The space elevators still reached toward the stars, but no ships traveled their lengths. The orbital stations hung in perfect formation around the planet, but they were as empty as ancient tombs. In the ruins of the United Nations building in New York, search teams found a single message left on the main display screen. It was written in over 200 languages, one for each species in the Galactic Council. "To whoever finds this message, humanity has departed for new frontiers beyond your reach. We leave behind our birth world as a monument to what we built together and what we chose to abandon. You wanted logical, predictable partners. We were never that. We were chaos and creativity, hope and stubbornness, dreams and impossible ambitions. You decided you no longer needed those things. We have gone to find a place where they are valued. Do not follow us. Build your perfect, logical civilization without us. We will build something different among the stars." The message was signed by every human ambassador who had ever served on the Council. Chen Wei's name was at the top, but thousands of others followed. Scientists, doctors, engineers, teachers, artists, and dreamers. All gone. All beyond reach. Dr. Kesthera finished her investigation with a simple, devastating conclusion. We did not lose a member species. We lost the heart of our civilization. Humans were not just participants in galactic society. They were the glue that held it together. They were the bridge between species that could never understand each other. They were the chaos that kept our order from becoming stagnation. End quote. She paused, her blue feathers rustling with emotion. And now, they are gone forever. The search for humanity ended not with discovery, but with acceptance. They were somewhere beyond the edge of the galaxy, building something that no council species could imagine or reach. They had answered the council's rejection with the ultimate response: complete withdrawal, complete silence, complete independence. The galaxy would have to learn to survive without them. 2 years after the human exodus, the Great Council chambers looked very different. Where once 200 species had gathered in a symphony of different voices, now only 94 remained. The vast hall felt empty and cold, with too much space between the remaining delegations. Council Prime Valathrix stood at his crystal podium, but his magnificent four-armed frame seemed smaller somehow. His skin no longer displayed the confident gold patterns of authority. Instead, it showed the dull gray colors of exhaustion and defeat. The bioluminescent markings that had once proclaimed his status had dimmed to almost nothing. The Skarn War had finally ended, but not through victory. The Council had been forced to surrender vast territories and agree to humiliating peace terms. Without human tactical innovation, the combined fleets of 94 species had been no match for an enemy that fought with human-style chaos and unpredictability. Entire star systems had been abandoned. Billions of aliens had become refugees in their own galaxy. The outer defense perimeter that humans had built and maintained was gone, leaving the inner worlds vulnerable to any future threat. But the war was only part of the disaster. The real catastrophe was the slow, steady collapse of everything the Council had built together over 3 centuries. Dr. Kesthera presented her final report to the nearly empty chamber. Her blue feathers had turned completely gray, and she moved like someone much older than her years. The xenopsychologist who had once studied the minds of hundreds of species now had far fewer subjects to observe. 67 species have withdrawn from the Council in the past 2 years, she announced, her voice echoing in the too large space. They cite irreconcilable differences, communication failures, and the inability to resolve conflicts peacefully. The numbers were devastating, but they only told part of the story. The Zephyrian Collective had been the first to leave, declaring that other species were too chaotic for efficient cooperation. They had retreated to their crystal worlds and refused all contact with the outside galaxy. The Korathi Confederation had followed soon after, claiming that the Council could no longer protect its members. They had formed their own alliance with other reptilian species and viewed all non-reptilian races with suspicion and hostility. Even the ancient Verdant Collective, plant beings who had been founding members of the Council, had withdrawn into isolation. They claimed that the galaxy had become too noisy and aggressive, without humans to mediate disputes. The remaining species eyed each other with growing distrust. Without human diplomats to smooth over cultural differences and find common ground, old grievances were resurging. Ancient territorial disputes that had been settled for centuries were being reopened. Trade agreements were collapsing as species demanded increasingly favorable terms for themselves. The psychological impact has been severe, Dr. Kesthera continued. Without human mediators, cross-species cooperation has decreased by 78%. Interspecies marriages have dropped to almost zero. Cultural exchange programs have been cancelled throughout Council space. The irony was not lost on anyone. The Council had dismissed humans for being too emotional, too unpredictable, too chaotic. But those emotions had been what allowed humans to understand and connect with species that thought in fundamentally different ways. The Histani, with their stone-like logic, could not comprehend the artistic expressions of the gas-dwelling nebula singers. The crystal-minded Zephyrians found the pack-hunting instincts of the Korathi to be primitive and disturbing. The collective consciousness of the Morvani was incompatible with the fierce individualism of the Wanderer clans. For 3 centuries, humans had been the translators not just of languages, but of entire ways of thinking. They had the emotional flexibility to understand how a rock creature could feel beauty, how a gas being could experience loneliness, how a hive mind could value individual achievement. Now those bridges were gone, and the galaxy was fracturing along species lines. The economic damage was catastrophic. Counselor Zeph Prime, one of the few Zephyrians still participating in council sessions via long-range communication, delivered the financial report with mechanical precision. Galactic trade has decreased by 52%. Administrative efficiency has dropped to pre-council levels. The cost of maintaining basic government functions has increased by 300% due to communication failures and cultural conflicts. But even these numbers could not capture the real loss. Innovation had nearly stopped. The great collaborative projects that had defined council civilization were impossible when species could not work together. The planned expansion to new galaxies had been cancelled. Medical research had stalled without human psychologists to coordinate cross-species studies. The galaxy was not just poorer. It was smaller, meaner, and increasingly hopeless. Admiral Corvex stood in the observation lounge of his flagship, looking out at stars that no longer seemed friendly. The Kelthan military had managed to contain the Skarn threat, but barely. His gray skin bore the scars of a dozen battles that should never have been lost. Beside him, Whisper of Wind reviewed the latest intelligence reports. The young Drexy had aged dramatically in the past 2 years, his silver skin marked with stress lines that would never fade. "Admiral," Whisper of Wind said quietly, "long-range sensors have detected new energy signatures from the deep dark. Whatever the humans are building out there, it is getting bigger." Corvex nodded without surprise. In the 2 years since humanity's departure, the mysterious signals from beyond the galactic rim had grown stronger and more complex. Ships traveling near the galaxy's edge reported seeing lights in the empty void between star systems. Strange lights that moved in patterns too organized to be natural phenomena. "They are building a new civilization," Corvex said with certainty. "Something we cannot imagine or reach. Something free from all the limitations we imposed on them." The final revelation came from an unexpected source. Deep in the abandoned human embassy on the Council's capital world, maintenance workers found Ambassador Chen Wei's personal office exactly as she had left it. Her desk was clean, her files were organized, and her computer displayed a single document. It was her final diplomatic log, dated 3 days before the fateful vote that had driven humanity from the Council. The entry was brief and devastating. "Personal log, Ambassador Chen Wei. The vote will pass tomorrow. I can see it in their faces, hear it in their voices. They have decided that humanity is too chaotic, too emotional, too unpredictable to be trusted with important decisions. They want logical partners who follow predictable patterns. They want order without chaos, cooperation without conflict, progress without risk. They want us to be something we are not and never can be. Tomorrow, I will give them exactly what they have asked for. We will leave them to build their perfect, logical civilization without us. They will have their order. We will find our own path among the stars, where chaos and dreams and impossible ambitions are not considered flaws to be corrected, but gifts to be celebrated." The log ended there. No anger, no threats, no demands for reconsideration, just a simple acceptance of what was about to happen, and a quiet determination to respond with dignity. The galaxy had gotten exactly what it voted for. Humanity was gone. The chaos was ended. The unpredictability was eliminated. The emotional decision-making was no longer a factor in galactic affairs, and in that perfect order, the Galactic Council was slowly dying. Council Prime Valathrix stood alone in the empty chambers after the latest session had ended with more departures and more failures. The great hall that had once hosted the voices of 200 species now echoed with the sound of his own breathing. He thought about the humans who had sat quietly at their table, accepting the judgment of species who had called themselves their betters. He remembered Ambassador Chen Wei's calm face as she gathered her materials and walked away without a word. The silence had been more powerful than any speech. The quiet departure had been more devastating than any threat. In walking away without argument or explanation, humanity had shown the galaxy exactly what it was losing. For 300 years, humans had been the heart of galactic civilization. Not because they were the strongest, or the smartest, or the most logical, but because they were the most human. They had emotions that let them understand other emotions. They had chaos that let them solve impossible problems. They had dreams that let them build bridges between minds that should never have been able to connect. And now they were gone. Building something magnificent in the darkness between galaxies, while the civilization they had helped create slowly crumbled without them. Valathrix looked up at the empty viewing gallery where human diplomats had once sat, observing sessions they were no longer allowed to participate in. The space was dark now, abandoned like everything else the humans had touched. In complete silence, the humans had walked away. In that silence, they had taken the soul of the galaxy with them. And in the years to come, as species after species withdrew into isolation and the great dreams of galactic unity faded into memory, the Council would finally understand the true price of the order they had demanded. They had wanted predictable partners. They had them now. But predictability, it turned out, was just another word for slow death.